All right, I guess I'm going to go ahead and get started. It's 7 o'clock sharp, so we don't want to delay. Thank you, everybody who is joining us on the YouTube channel. Once again, to clarify, everybody who's not a participant is going to be viewing on our YouTube live stream. And you're still going to be able to ask questions using the chat function that's on there. And we're going to have moderators screening through those questions to be able to ask the different presenters here tonight. And of course, we're not going to be able to get to everybody's question. It's going to be impossible. We're averaging in several hundred people on these, which is just really fantastic. So thanks again for joining. But we're going to try and screen some of the questions that are of general enough interest for the different presenters so that everybody can benefit. So sorry if we don't get to yours, but you should be able to benefit from the discussion tonight. We have a really great lineup this evening, and so I'm just going to go ahead and get started. Once again, we have this webinar broken down into several segments, and so the first one I will take this evening. We're really going to be talking about different things going on with your bees and what you should be doing as a beekeeper, what we call bees in season. So understanding kind of what your bees are doing right now really gives you a lot of insight into what you should be doing as a beekeeper. And so as of right now, in kind of mid to late May, because we started spring so early, it's starting to end early, but because it's been kind of cold and rainy, it's been a really prolonged spring as well. So spring is drawing out, but it's still ending a little bit early. Perhaps not as early as we would have if we would have had kind of a normal length of a spring. One thing that beekeepers are experiencing all across the state and in the Southeast is that we had that really cold spell over Mother's Day weekend from the polar vortex that kind of dipped down. And the result that that's had is it really set the bees and their forage back. The bees had to kind of dip into their honey stores for heat, and they kind of went back into winter mode practically, especially up in the upper elevations. And so a lot of nutritional problems have been seeing bees. If they were kind of on the verge of starvation, that could have really put them over the edge. And it put a real damper in the spring nectar flow as well. So it's something to think about. These recent rains that much of North Carolina and the Southeast has been experiencing too, has washed out a lot of the nectaries. And so, you know, not only are the bees not able to go out and forage in inclement weather such as this, so they're just kind of stuck at home, but those sources aren't going to be waiting for them after they go out. So a lot of the petals have been dropping without adequate pollination. So it really hasn't been very conducive to the final throes of the nectar flow that's been going on this spring. One thing that does tend to happen this time of year, in this transition going from spring to summer, especially as the bees start to brood down, is they start to backfill that brood nest with honey. And Jennifer mentioned that she's been seeing a lot of this happening in our yards at NC State. And so it's really important to understand, this may be review and basic for many of you, but just to reemphasize the importance of the brood nest architecture that's going on inside those boxes, right? That there's this three-dimensional architecture of how the bees are using the comb. So of course in the middle, on the bottom middle, is where they have the brood, where they want to keep that the warmest, and they want to keep that at a good 95 degrees Fahrenheit, right? But that's more like a sphere than it is a circle, right? So if you imagine that it's this kind of nested Russian doll, right, or a turducken, right, where you have brood in the middle, there's kind of this shell of pollen that's stored in the comb around the brood, because that's what's fed to the brood for their protein source. And then on the outside and on the top of that entire kind of three-dimensional structure is where they store the honey, which they don't keep nearly as warm, and it actually serves as a insular blanket and traps the heat inside. So it's actually a very efficient way to insulate the brood nest. So if you look at this kind of three-dimensional structure from the top down, and you take kind of successive slices through this three-dimensional architecture, like what we have with our 5 or 10 or 8 or however many frames that we provide them, and you take a cross-section of those, when you have a cross-section of a frame right in the middle, then obviously most of that comb is going to have brood with this kind of ring, this rainbow of honey of pollen that's on the outside of that, and then maybe you have a little bit of honey in the upper corners, right? So that's kind of a very typical frame, brood frame, that you see in the middle of that three-dimensional structure. But if you take a cross-section further on the outside, or one of the outside frames, what you see is mostly food, mostly honey, and maybe a little ring like this of brood and or pollen that's right here, right? So on the outside, you tend to have more food. On the inside is where you have the brood nest. And so I bring all this up as a review that these things are very plastic over time. So the size of the brood nest very much expands and contracts depending on the season and depending on the colony's ability to grow or to retract. And so this time of year, in the springtime, they're booming and they're making as much brood as they can. The queen's laying 2,000 eggs a day, and they can have 8, 10, 12 frames of brood within a kind of a double deep beehive. But as they're preparing now to kind of go into summer mode, which is less about expansion, but more about retraction and stabilization of the population, then the brood nest shrinks. And so what happens is that as that brood nest gets emptied and as the brood hatches out, they backfill it with honey. And so this is a great picture of that, where you see this honey frame where it's all capped over, and you can tell that that was collected and sealed off a long time ago. But here's this emptied out part of the brood nest that is no longer being used for brood, and they're putting in fresh nectar and ripening that into honey right now. So this is kind of still drippy honey right here, but it used to be part of the brood nest. So if you look at those frames, what used to be, half brood, half food, is now all food, because the brood nest is contracting and they're backfilling that space, that same space that was brood, but it's now honey. So something to think about, again, as a beekeeper, what you want to always be doing is looking ahead 1 to 2 brood cycles from now, which is about 3 to 6 weeks, so that you can help the bees prepare for what they're going to need then, right? So that they have enough time to raise the brood and to be ready for that event. So one of the things, obviously, that's probably most likely going to be happening, a good month from now, is that it's going to get hot, right? So things are going to start to get hot. So just realize that, and realize what the bees need to do. That is, they need good water source, and they need the ability to collect that and cool the hive down. As I was just mentioning, because they're going to be brooding down, they're going to be stabilizing their population. So what you want is a good equilibrium between the queen's ability to lay eggs and the natural die-off of the workers, so that they equal each other. And so the colony's not really growing, but it's also not declining either. So you want to, if you can, stabilize the populations and get them ready to do so. Another thing that can really start to happen in the transition from spring to summer is that overwintered queens, that is, queens that mated last spring, they overwintered this past winter, they just made it through the swarm season this year, and hopefully you stayed on top so they didn't take off and start their own colonies. Those kind of older overwintered queens can really start to kind of run out of gas. Queens used to live, 4 or 5 years, and that was a pretty standard thing. These days, if they live, 2 years, that's a pretty long-lived queen. So the longevity of queens, and we don't entirely know why, but there's lots of complicated factors that are going into why they're just not living as long. So if you have a queen that mated last spring, you want to definitely be keeping an eye on her to make sure that she is laying well, that her brood pattern remains really solid, and especially looking for those drone brood within the worker area of the brood nest, right? Of course, the brood nest is that kind of central sphere, but the drones tend to be on the periphery of that rather than right in the middle. So if you have this area of contiguous worker brood, but you start seeing these kind of humps of larger drone brood interspersed in there, that's a suggestion that she might be running out of sperm. She's not fertilizing those eggs that she's intending to be workers, but instead they're turning into drones. And that might mean that kind of her time is fairly limited. So that's something to be looking out for, especially this time of year. Another good reason why you want to mark queens as well. If you don't know how old your queen is, then it makes it really difficult to know which ones you should be keeping a closer eye on versus others. So mark your queens by the color year, and then that way you'll know which queens are from, this year, last year, or even the year before. So Sharon, are there any questions from the live stream kind of about what's going on with the bees and what we should be doing as beekeepers?
Related to what you just spoke about, Jerry asked, is combining weak hives good or bad this period of year?
I can kick that over to Jennifer. I'll put my 2 cents in, but I don't think there's kind of a right and wrong way. But I think by default, what I've always done and have been told is that you don't want to unite 2 weak colonies together to make kind of one medium colony. What's actually better is to unite a weak colony with a stronger colony. And then that way, later on, you may be able to split that colony back into 2. Trying to kind of hobble 2 weak colonies united together can be a little more difficult and more trouble than it's worth. Jen, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would, but and I'm actually going to mention that as well.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, it can be done this time of year.
Well, it's very premonitious then that question
Yeah.
came up. So excellent, excellent. Okay, so I think I'll turn it over to Jen then and talk about the timely topic. So again, as beekeepers, we want to be thinking ahead so we don't get caught off guard and scrambling at the last second. And so as the honey flow is really starting to wrap up, now is the time, not a month from now, but now is the time to really start thinking about what you need to do in order to harvest your honey. So I'm going to turn this over to Jen.
All right, thank you. So yes, hi everyone. Tonight I'm not talking about honey harvesting that you're probably thinking about, where we're talking about pulling the supers off and uncapping and all the exciting parts, but rather I'm going to talk about what we should be doing right now in order to make that part of the experience more successful. And like David mentioned, we're always planning for the next step. So what you're doing right now is actually something that we're thinking about for what's going to be happening for like 3 to 6 weeks from now. And that's about how long it's going to be until we're ready to pull the supers off. And well, for me, I don't like to do it multiple times, so I wait till they're all done, and so I only have to extract 1 time. Some people I know do like to do it ahead of time. As they fill supers up, extract, and then put them back on. I wait till we're done, so I only have to do it 1 time. So what I am trying to do right now in order to get ready for that process, there's a few things out in the bee yard. First of all, I'm trying to figure out if the honey flow is over yet, and I'm still not sure. I keep thinking it is, but then I see this nice white comb that the bees are making. So like maybe it's not quite over, but it has definitely slowed down. I'm not putting up any new supers at this point. I'm just trying to get the bees to finish filling up and capping the ones that I have out there. I think it's a little bit late to be putting up foundation or anything like empty to have and expect them to fill it up this year. I think we're past that point. It's been a very weird year with the early spring and then the cold spell, and now it's pouring down rain for a week. So we're gonna wait and see what happens next week when this rain quits and it warms back up. Who knows? Maybe we'll have another flow. But with that, let's assume that the nectar flow is just about done. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that the bees are going to finish off the supers that I've put out. And so one thing, as I'm going through my hives, and I look at the supers to see how full they are, if they're full, if they're not quite full. One thing I do is move the frames around, trying to encourage the bees to finish. So sometimes, we all know bees work from the center towards the outside. So if you have a box up on the top box, maybe they haven't quite finished the outer edge of those frames. If they've completely capped the center ones, move those to the outside, move the outside ones towards the inside, and that will encourage them to ripen those frames, cap them over. And our goal is to have all 10 frames completely capped. And we know we need at least 75% of the frames capped in order to extract, because if you have a greater percentage than that open, then your chances of having a high moisture content is greater, and then you can lose all your honey to fermentation. So we want at least 75% capped. And so that's why I'm really interested in seeing what's capped right now and trying to move them around, encourage the bees to finish capping the other ones. And then I didn't mention this here, but one more thing is sometimes you go into a hive that you put a super up on because it was nice and strong 2 or 3 weeks ago. Maybe something happened and it's not so strong anymore. Maybe it swarmed and they didn't requeen successfully, or something else happened. If that super is like half full and you don't think that they're going to get to it, if the bees aren't strong enough and you have another one next door and it's really strong, you can always take that super off and put it over on the other stronger hive and let them finish it off. We don't want to end up the end of the season with some half-filled supers, because then you don't know what to do with the frames. And it's just kind of a pain. So that's what I'm trying to do right now. All right, and then back to this preparing for your honey harvest. There's some things you can do right now since it's raining and cold and the bees are not really wanting us to interrupt. We can go ahead and get ready, get all of our supplies ready. Figure out how many supers you have out there, how many frames are filled. Using this, we can determine how many buckets, how many strainers, how many jars, and all that good stuff that you're going to need, because once you pull the supers, you don't want to have to run out to go buy stuff at that point. You want it all ready. And you can figure it out using some math. I'm going to just give the info for medium 10 frame supers, because that's what I know. That's what we use. So one full 10 frame medium super is roughly 2.5 gallons of honey. Now you can figure it out if you're using shallows, obviously it's going to be a little bit less, maybe like 2 gallons. And if you're using 8 frame equipment, you can work it out as well. And then to figure out how many jars, about 12 pounds per gallon of honey. So figure out how many jars you're using. Pound jars is easy. If not, you got to do some math, but you can figure it out. That's the one thing you can put off is the jars, but everything else you really need right then. So get everything ready before you pull that first super. Okay. All right, the other thing you can be doing while it's raining outside is finding all your other equipment. If you have an extractor of your own, first of all, find it. Make sure it is running and clean. I mean, if you're like me, it's been sitting in the same corner since last August, and it has a big layer of dust and maybe some dead moths on it. So clean it up, get it ready. If you don't have your own extractor, check with your county club. Most of the county clubs have something available to the members to be borrowed or rented or something like that. Every county's different, but check with your club and see what they have to offer and what the procedure is, and go ahead and sign up now. Figure out a good weekend or a week or whatever you need.
And if your club doesn't have one, that's a really excellent project for you guys
there you go.
Right?
Yeah, good use of their funds. And maybe organize with some other beekeepers if you have several in a little small area, get together and everybody do it same day, make work a whole lot lighter, because it's kind of a pain to get, if you only have a few frames, for example, it's almost not worth doing. But if there's several people like that, then you can work it out. Okay, next. So some other things that you'll need besides the extractor. There's some things that are absolutely necessary and some things that are just handy to have. So a hot knife is not necessary, but it's extremely handy if you have access to one. And I think most clubs that have the extractor probably have some kind of a knife to go with it. So the hot knife, or if not, then a serrated knife at least, to remove the wax cappings. So after we work hard to get the bees to cover up all these frames with wax, we have to uncap them. And then from there, you need an uncapping fork. Actually, just a plain old fork works fine. Something to pick off every cap that the knife doesn't hit. You want to make sure all the caps get hit. And then when you do this, if you've never extracted honey before, as soon as you cut those cappings off, honey comes pouring out, flowing out. And you don't want to lose that. Every drop is very precious. So you want to have a tub in order to collect all this excess honey and the cappings. So then you can harvest that part later. You can strain that and bottle it as well. And also the cappings you can then render and melt down into a wax block and use for candles or cosmetics, whatever. So everything is very precious and you don't want to lose it. Buckets are pretty common. You can get them almost anywhere. The one thing I would recommend is to make sure you have at least one with that nice little spout on the bottom that you see in this picture. That makes pouring from the bucket into a jar much easier, and it's well worth the investment. And of course, all of these things can be found at any of the bee supply places. Everybody, they would all be happy to sell any of these products. So just go online and see what's available. But really, this is the time to think about that. If you don't already have these, go ahead and figure out what you're going to be doing. It's also a good time to figure out where you're going. I didn't mention, like, you need a special room. You can't do this outside. If you do this outside, you'll have bees attracted from your yard. So you want to be inside, and you want it somewhere where you don't mind getting it too messy. I've made a few big messes doing this, so you got to prepare. And also, when you bring the supers inside, they're capped, they're nice and clean. But after you pull those frames out of the extractor, they're pretty sticky, messy, and then you got to figure out what to do with them. So just be prepared to make a mess, and you'll be good. And this is a good time to plan what you're going to do with the supers after you extract them. So, you want to put them back onto the hives and let the bees clean them up. You want to set them out in the yard and let them get robbed out. All options. Each one has an advantage and a disadvantage. So time to think about that and be prepared. And then one other thing, I don't want to get too far into this, but if you're going through your hives right now and they're not making these supers full of honey, if you have supers up and they're just not filling them, this is a good time to figure out what's going on. Is there something wrong with your bees? Did they not requeen? Talked about combining. This is an opportunity to combine some colonies together if needed. And just also, if you're going to be grafting or making queens, maybe you don't want to use these to make new queens. So make notes of things like this. That's about it. Oh, wait, one more thing. I forgot to mention beetles. So we used to be able to pull supers off and then just extract them whenever we got around to it. But this is another good reason to have everything ready, because of the introduction of the small hive beetle into North Carolina and everywhere pretty much, I now want to extract almost the same day that I pull the supers off. Because if you let them sit for too long, you'll get small hive beetles crawling in there, laying eggs, and then the larvae start to hatch out. So it's really important to extract quickly, and also don't let your extracted super sit for too long, because you will also get the larva in there. So that's why you got to figure out what to do and have the bees clean them back up or freeze them or do something. So that's about it. Hopefully, maybe later we'll have an actual demo on how to extract, but for now, we're just planning.
Okay, well, that's great, Jen. Thanks so much. Sharon, any good questions from the audience there for Jennifer on getting ready for honey extraction?
You'll have to let me know. Mark asked about whether, with the weather changing so much, is checkerboarding frames now a bad idea? I'm not sure we covered that.
Well, let's see. So checkerboarding, I think of as trying to give more space. For this one, I'm really more interested in the, so wait a minute. If we're talking about in the brood chamber, then yeah, it probably is a bad idea right now. If we're talking about in the honey supers, I wouldn't even consider doing that right now.
Yeah, why, like, what would be a reason, Jen, why you would kind of checkerboard frames in a honey super, just to draw out the wax if you only have foundation, or why would anybody do that during a honey flow?
Yeah, during the honey flow, probably just if I had some frames I wanted drawn out, and
Yeah.
I would throw them in between some of the other ones, maybe.
Right. That's what I would see. That's how I read that question, and that makes a lot of sense. But you don't want to overdo it. Maybe 1 or 2 frames at a time, and make sure that that's drawn out and really starting to get filled before you put the next one in.
Right.
Yeah.
I've got 2 more. One from D Savage. I have first year hives from packages, so not planning to harvest. Anything I need to do different?
No, not. I'm assuming you're probably not going to be putting supers on if you're not planning to harvest. So just let them build up and store as much as they can in this. If you have 2 brood boxes, hopefully they'll fill up the second brood box with honey by the end of the summer. That's your goal.
One thing that does come to my mind, though, Jen, is help out your mentor or somebody else in your club so that you can get practice on their frames, and you can learn how to uncap and how to use the uncapping knife and go through the whole process before it's your turn, right? So I think that's something that you can do. Again, honey extraction as a communal activity is a really, really great thing, especially if you're starting out.
Or especially if you're not starting out, then you love help.
Yeah. Yeah, they'll appreciate it as well. So, well, great. Yeah, go ahead. Okay. One more question.
This is from Mark. Do you have any thoughts on extracting uncapped honey that is lower than 18.6% moisture content? He's got a significant amount of uncapped frames in his apiary that bees just don't want to cap.
Okay, well, it's still early. I would not worry. I wouldn't worry yet. I mean, they get time. Let them sit there for a while, and hopefully the bees will cap them over. I mean, it's still early.
But you definitely don't want to say, well, they're not going to get to it, and then you extract it anyway, right? Because if it's above that magic moisture content, it'll spoil, or worse. So.
No, I wouldn't even think about yet. Maybe if it was September and they hadn't capped it, then I might go ahead, but no, don't.
Yeah, I would definitely avoid that. There have been cases where people knowingly extract high moisture honey, and then they put it in a really close room with a dehumidifier to try and dry it down and all that other stuff. But that's kind of very advanced stuff and very risky. So just best let the bees do it. What Jen said, just be a little more patient. Hopefully they'll get to it. With it being so humid too, it might be harder for them to dry out that last little bit. So that could be a reason as well. Well, all great discussions. Thank you, Jen. That was really excellent. It's gotten me really excited about our honey harvest this year, if we're allowed to do it closer than 6 feet apart, or maybe we can pull it off. being 6 feet apart. But as you can tell, we kind of have a theme talking about honey, or at least thinking about what we're going to do with our spoils this season. And so we've invited for our interview this time around Ed Spear. Ed Spear is the chairman of the North Carolina State Beekeepers Committee on the honey standard and on the honey certification program. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and welcome Ed. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Hi, Dave.
Thanks again for coming. I think, you know, I'm really excited by Jen's presentation and kind of talking about honey. It really is one of the real joys of beekeeping, right? So for many years now, the NCSBA has had this program, and you're their new chair. So you've taken over by some of your predecessors who've really done an excellent job. Can you kind of walk us through what this program is? And again, this is just for North Carolina, but it's something else that other states might emulate.
Yes, and like I say, this is a great follow-up to what Jen was just talking about. So after you get your honey, after you've harvested, do you have some for sale? Are you interested in trying to sell some of your honey? And most of us have dreams of doing that. So most beekeepers would find some value in this program. Like you say, it's the North Carolina State Beekeeping Association's official marketing program. And let me see if I can share this. The program is designed to help us sell our honey. It's specifically geared toward North Carolina honey. And as a matter of fact, I can't change slides. Page down.
You might have to click directly on the screen.
Yeah, let me figure this out for just a second. There we go. All right. Yeah, the objective of the program is to promote direct hive-to-table sales of real North Carolina honey. So customers are very much aware of the universe of phony or funny honey that's available for purchase in the stores. This program is specifically designed to connect customers who are looking for real local honey with real local North Carolina beekeepers. And so the program is based highly based on the integrity of the beekeepers. So whether you're selling your honey directly to the public or whether you're selling it through a store, whether you're doing consignments or doing retail sales or wholesales, this program really is for you. It's to connect the customer with the beekeeper. One of the greatest things of the program are these labels. They certified by the North Carolina State Beekeepers Association. These are adhesive labels that you can apply to your bottles of honey. And these only members of the Certified Honey Producer Program can legally purchase and use these labels. The labels come in 3 different sizes. I have some pictures here to show. Here's some of the small labels on the first 2 1-pound jars. And then this medium-sized label is on a pint-sized jar, and the larger jar has a large label on it. The small labels will also fit very nicely on the top of a 1-pound honey jar. That's where you want to put the label. So when a customer sees this label on a jar of honey, it certainly assures them that they are getting real, unadulterated, pure North Carolina honey. And that's what the program is all about. Some of the other benefits of the program, they are the Discover the Goodness stickers, which are also adhesive stickers, a little bit larger. that you can put on your boxes. And then there's the Discover the Goodness license plate, which you can, proudly show on your car. But the real cat's meow of the program is this map right here. This is an online interactive map on Google, but the red pins here represent each of the members, the current members of the Certified Honey Producer Program. So an interested customer who's looking for local honey can find this map online, enlarge the map to find their location, and then click on one of the red pins that's close to them, and the information about that beekeeper comes up.
Now, does it indicate where they sell that honey, or just where their apiaries are, or what does that map point to the customer?
Yeah, each beekeeper decides for themselves what information they want to put on their pin, and that information can be updated at any time. So you can put just your name and a pin showing your location, or you can put your address, you can put your phone number if you want, your email, how the customer can get in touch with you. So if you sell at a store, you can use that store as the location for your pin. So the program has some very strict guidelines, but if you just look through this list very quickly, you'll see that these are the sort of things that most beekeepers take pride in doing anyway. So we want to be sure that the beekeepers are following reasonable and safe beekeeping practices. We don't want any adulterated honey or faked honey. We don't want to add or remove pollen from the honey. We don't want to use destructive heating of the honey. Things like that. So when a beekeeper applies to join the program, they have to confirm or affirm that they will follow these guidelines. So the membership to the program is $25, and that gets you a 2-year subscription. You already have to be a member of the North Carolina State Beekeeping Association in order to join the Certified Honey Program. But this allows you to cut, like we mentioned a moment ago, to customize the entry that's going to show up on the locator map. There's also an online registry, just a simple list of everybody who's in the program. And again, each member can customize how much information they want to show up on that list. You get some stickers to start with. When in your welcome package, you get 50 small certified honey stickers and 50 of the Discover the Goodness stickers. That's to get you started and give you an idea of how to use the stickers. You also get one of the license plates, as I mentioned. And being a member of the program gives you the right to purchase and use more of the certified honey stickers. And as I said, only members of the program are allowed to purchase and use these stickers. So people who are producing honey outside of North Carolina are not allowed in the program. People who are importing honey, distributing honey across many state lines, things like this, so they are not allowed to join this program. It is strictly limited to individual members of the North Carolina State Beekeeping Association. And you also get a nice certificate to display. To join the program, the second level of integrity comes from your beekeeper reference. You need an endorsement from another beekeeper in order to join the program. But these references have to be eligible to be a reference in the first place. And those requirements are, number one, the beekeeper reference must also be a member of the North Carolina State Beekeeping Association. And then they must meet one more requirement. And there's 4 different requirements here. In addition to being a member of the North Carolina Beekeeping Association, they can be at least one of these other requirements. They could be a master beekeeper of the state association. They could be a member of the executive board of the State Beekeeping Association, or they could be a member of the executive board of any of the state association clubs or chapters. And maybe they're already a member of the Certified Honey Producer Program. In other words, everyone who is already a member of the program can act as a reference for someone who's applying to the program. So on the North Carolina State Beekeeping Association website, if you go to the programs tab at the top, it will bring up a drop-down menu that will take you to the Certified Honey Producer Program. Another drop-down menu will show you 6 different web pages where all of this information is repeated. And there's an application there where you can sign up online.
Well, that's really terrific, Ed. I mean, I think it's really come a long way, and you keep getting increasing participation. You may or may not be tracking data on this, but you probably have some anecdotal information or accounts of people either being able to sell more of their honey or to get a higher premium price for their honey. So like I'm sure there are other incentives other than just having a self-policing group among the honey producers within the state. Is that true?
Yes, one of my goals is to promote the premium quality or nature of our honey. North Carolina produces some of the best honey in the world. We win awards in all kinds of competitions. And of course, all the way across the state, we have different kinds of honey in each geographic location. And each of those honeys has won awards in the past. So North Carolina really does need to promote their honey and raise their prices.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I agree with that. Well, to that point, some of the reasons why North Carolina has a lot of high quality honey is because we have these different variants of honey types, right? So I think, different nectar bearing plants produce different tasting honeys, and some of those are very, very coveted, rather than just wildflower honey, right? Which is just a mixture of what happens to be around that particular beehive. So I'm sure you get a lot of this, and we certainly get a lot of questions. Everybody wants to give me a jar of honey and say, where did this come from? So is that part of your program? And if not, why not? Just how difficult is it to actually kind of get an answer like that?
Well, yes, those different honeys that you were talking about from across the state do have their own unique flavor. The single source honey, single floral sources honeys. And I, for one, am trying to teach myself to recognize the different flavors. Of course, using pollen analysis helps us greatly in understanding where our honeys are coming from. It's been very informative.
But it's really hard to do, and it blends. Right? I mean, there's a whole continuum, right? Like to say
Yes.
there's a pure anything is kind of difficult because the bees don't care. They're just, putting whatever they're collecting into the combs.
Yes.
But if you are a good beekeeper in your right environment, you can have what's practically or close to pure, but it's really hard to kind of fingerprint that, right? So
Yes.
I don't think that's, and my point is that's not kind of the point of the program here. Is just where it came from, not what it is, correct?
That's right. Yes. The honey stands on its own. No, in spite of what you call it, does it taste good? That's the real kicker right there. And sure enough, North Carolina has probably 8 or 10 different excellent flavored honeys.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Well, they always say that local honey is the ethical sweetener because you don't have to put nearly as much energy into raising, beet sugar or cane sugar and then transporting it all over the world and everything. Local honey is definitely the way to go. And of course, we're all biased here, but it tastes a lot better too, right? So,
Yes.
well, thank you, Ed. Sharon, are there any questions? We're going to move into our kind of question and answer section here for the last kind of 15 minutes or so. But is there a question here that's best for Ed to address?
Yeah, I think this one, there might be two, but this one for sure. For the certified program, how are audits done to ensure quality?
How are audits done? We don't do any enforcement except for personal knowledge. Like your beekeeper reference. The program is totally dependent on the integrity of the individual beekeeper, and we try and promote that to the max. The second level of integrity then comes from the reference who endorses the applicant. The only enforcement we would do in the program, we might kick someone out of the program if they're not following the guidelines, which they said they would follow when they joined the program. But we've never kicked anyone out so far. That's not what the program is about.
Okay. And then I know you mentioned that the person who refers somebody needs to be a certified beekeeper, or would be helpful. But does a person entering this program have to be a certified beekeeper to be a certified honey producer?
Do you mean in the Master Beekeeper program, certified
Yes.
as in, yeah.
Yes.
I didn't fully understand the question.
So does somebody to participate in this program need to be in the North Carolina Master Beekeeper program at any level, certified or otherwise?
No, just has to be a member of the state association.
That's
Yeah, so certified is used in multiple contexts there, so that can be confusing. So when you say certified, that's certified by this program, not the Master Beekeeper
That's
program.
right.
So
That's right.
That's great. Thank you for that clarification. Okay. Other questions for anybody? Ed, me, Jennifer, any of the inspectors that are on the call, or other program members?
I have a couple. I'm not sure who to send it to, but probably Jen, what do you put your honey frames into to go from bee yard to extraction room, something that can be sealed?
I actually don't put them in anything except for the box, the super themselves. If I'm at a different yard, I try to get all the bees out as best I can, brush them out, blow them out. There's all different techniques for that. And then I just put the whole super into a lid on the back of the truck. And then I put another lid on top to keep bees out if I have other things to do at the yard. That time of year, bees are going to be snooping and trying to find a free meal. So I just want to keep it covered up until as best I can until I get away. That's all I do.
An upside down lid, put the super in, and then you put a right side up lid on top of that. You don't want to put the super on a bottom board, because then there's an entrance to get into the combs. That's what you mean by put it on a lid, right?
Yes, I want it sealed up as best I can. And the other thing about that is just try to keep if they're nicely capped frames, just try your best not to puncture any of those cappings. As long as they're not punctured, that honey's not going to flow out. So just be gentle. And that's why I think best to keep them in the super, because that's what they were, and there's proper spacing, so it's all good.
Right on.
Okay.
Great, good question.
From Melinda, will the bees eat fermented honey?
I think they have a very low threshold for that.
What was the question?
If bees eat fermented honey, I think if it's, and again, anybody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think if it just is starting, then they might, but it doesn't have to ferment too much for it to be distasteful to them. Is that an accurate statement? I'm asking Jen or
I agree.
there's Adolphus.
That's what I would say.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's a very kind of wishy-washy, very subjective rather than objective answer, saying it has to be X%, alcohol or something like that. I don't know the definitive answer to that, but yeah, I think they have a pretty low tolerance for the fermentation. So that's why it's really critical to avoid it in the first place.
Another one is it okay to freeze the frames of honey before extracting? I'm not sure why, but.
Yeah, that's a good question. You can freeze frames of honey, but it won't crystallize. The crystallization actually occurs not because of it hot or cold. It actually occurs based on the ratios of certain sugars in the honey with the moisture content. So you can actually put sealed or capped over, unpunctured wax cappings into the freezer, and then take it out, and then extract it later, and it will still be, liquid honey. So you can do that, and you can store it for a very, very long period of time. One of the things that you need to be careful, though, is that just like all moisture, it expands slightly when it freezes, and therefore it can kind of puncture the wax cappings when it's in the freezer, but it won't run out because it's frozen. So when you take it out, it can start running. So you don't want to take them out. You want to extract it right away right after it thaws. So other than that caveat, I think you can do that fairly readily. But
you will have to warm it up to get it extracted.
Yeah, it has to get, and room temperature. You don't want to take a blowtorch to it and melt the wax, right? Yeah, you definitely want to let it warm up, but you don't want to let it sit too long because it can get kind of runny at that point.
Okay. Do you want to take a couple more?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Does Lewis have any opinions on the hop guard mite treatment?
Please, Lewis, you're on the call if you are able to answer and willing.
I believe Lewis had to leave.
Oh, okay.
That's too bad. Well, how about you, Leonard? Or I think John Harris is also on the call, another apiary inspector for the NCDA. Are you on the call as well? No, I think he was having audio problems earlier, so my apologies. But Adolphus, would you like to take that? Because I can certainly make something up.
Well, I have, all I can report is I have beekeepers in my area that decidedly don't like it. And I have other beekeepers that think it's fine and it does well. So that's all I have to report. I would treat it, if I've never used it before, as a bit of an experiment and see which category you fall into, whether you despise it or you like it a lot.
That's good advice. And I think it also underscores the point that there isn't a one size fits all for everybody. You as a beekeeper need to play around, and what works for you is what you should use. And just because it works for somebody else doesn't mean it necessarily will work for you or won't work for you. You need to work it into your operation as well. I should say that the published data on the hop guard are fairly underwhelming under certain controlled conditions. They recommend that it really is only best in broodless situations. So doing it in the kind of height of the season and inside the colonies might not be quite as effective as perhaps some other alternatives. But if you induce a broodless period, or if you use it to treat packages as they first arrive, or something like that, when all of the mites within that bee colony are in the phoretic stage, then I think it's a lot more effective. So at least that's what the literature says. But Adolphus's point is really important. There is no kind of definitive answer to that, but go ahead and try it. And if you like it, then keep using it. Thank you, Adolphus. Appreciate that.
Yeah. Along those thoughts, Jennifer asked, are there any health risks to eating honey that has been exposed to oxyacid treatment?
The oxalic acid treatment. Yeah, that's a good point. I think the dosage is important, but that is something you're not supposed to, while the honey supers are on, you're not supposed to be applying any sort of miticides in any way, because you don't want to get that into the honey. that said, there are natural levels, and I don't know exactly what they are off the top of my head, but there are kind of natural levels of oxalic acid that naturally occurs in honey already. And so it all depends on the amount. For those of you in regulatory, do you guys know offhand what the limit is for oxalic acid, acceptable limit in honey?
I do not know the levels. I know some food products, of course, have small amounts of oxalic,
Right.
but I would add that Formic Pro is labeled for use on supers.
Right. So formic acid is allowed, but not oxalic, correct?
Correct.
Formic is one of the few products that is permitted while you have honey supers on, and you're actively trying to harvest honey, right? So, but for oxalic acid, you're not supposed to by label. And I think the amount that's in honey, it's you can't really taste it. So if you know it has an acidic taste to it from oxalic, then clearly that's way too high. So you just should avoid, and should just be an all or nothing thing that you never treat when you have honey supers on your hives.
Right. Feed it to the bees if you got some extra.
Yeah, if you absolutely have to, or you make a mistake and you forgot or something like that, yeah, it's always great to feed that back to the bees. Good point. Some other questions, Sharon?
Yeah, this is probably for Jen. Do you put in an empty box when you take a full super off to prevent overcrowding?
That is a good question. And no, I usually don't. If you have several supers on and you pull them off, then yes, you will see bees bearding that night. That box is now very full, but they'll figure it out. That's usually the end of the season. The population will be coming down anyway, so it just helps them figure out that they need to do that. It's not going to produce swarming in June, July. You won't have a swarm. It's just they'll be crowded for a while, but it'll get back to normal. So that's what I do. Of course, you ask somebody else, you'll get a different opinion, different answer. So just that's the way it is.
Yep.
Here's another. If the bees backfill the deeps, but then don't have enough room for the queen to lay, will they move the honey up into the supers?
They can, yeah. So that's a good point. Again, they'll think of that three-dimensional architecture of the brood nest to be very plastic. If you like in the springtime, for example, if you have an expanding brood nest in one box and you put an entirely full brood box full of honey on top of that, they will clear out that center part of that honey. They just need to be able to put it somewhere, right? So if you do that, make sure you put honey supers up, and they will move that honey up into the extra space, because they definitely want to be expanding that brood nest. If there are other spaces within that nest, then they may be limited. But that's how you get this term called honey bound, right? Where the bees need to expand the brood nest and they need to utilize that honey, but they can't put it anywhere. They can't eat it and use it fast enough otherwise. And so you can really limit the growth of the colony and growth of the queen's egg laying capacity, because they're honey bound, because they have too much honey within the where they would normally be raising brood. So yeah, they will go back and empty that out if they need to. Absolutely.
There's a couple more here. Paul asked early on, should we expect a normal or high honey crop
this year?
Yeah.
If I were predicting, or what does Vegas say right now, I would say that it's probably going to be under average year. Ed, would you agree with that? That it's maybe an under average year? Or maybe it's different up in the mountains than it is down here in the Piedmont.
Yes, there's a great difference between the geographic locations. We're just now in the middle of our poplar flow. Of course, this 4 days of solid rain doesn't help that at all. But we were looking to have a pretty good season. for instance, the last 2 years, we haven't gotten any poplar at all.
Yeah.
But this year they were making quite a bit of poplar honey. So I've talked to a beekeeper yesterday in this area who has 2 full supers already. And he's asking me what he should do. And of course, I told him, bring him over to my place.
Well, I mean, it is very hyper variable, right? Every hive has a 3-mile radius around it that they can, collect hopefully the best sources that they can find within that kind of 50 square miles of real estate. So it's going to vary from place to place and from, region to region. But I think overall, because things started so early and the bees weren't kind of built up in time, and because things have kind of lagged on and some of this kind of colder weather and other things, I would just predict that overall it's probably going to be below average, but we won't know until we actually start bottling it up, right? So
we can always hope for the next harvest.
That's right. That's right. Well, I hope we've inspired you guys, everybody who's joined us this evening, to really get excited and prepared for the upcoming honey harvest season. Don't forget to come back 2 weeks from tonight. We're doing this every other week, so our next one is going to be on June 3rd. We're going to be talking about a completely different topic. We're actually going to be talking about the different types of bees and genetics and their different characteristics. And we're really, really fortunate to have our guest interview to be Dr. Debbie Delaney, who is the extension apiculturist up at the University of Delaware and one of the leading experts on some of the different types of bees and kind of the phylogenetics and breeding of honeybees. And she's also an alumni of NC State University. So she was here about 10 years ago, and ever since she's been up in Delaware. So we're really excited to host her. So be sure to keep tabs on our webinar page. Also, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. That will give you an automatic notification that the live stream has begun, and so you don't have to worry about emails or anything else. Once we start, you'll get a notification directly, or you can email us and put your email on our listserv, and we can email you directly as well. So thanks again for participating. Thanks again to Ed Spear once again for being our guest, and everybody have a great evening.